everybody. Welcome to ZTV Live. Today is Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. I'm Susan Mulligan-Fleischman, and I'm so glad that you've joined us tonight. Tonight is Reading, Writing, and Ralph with our literary editor, Ralph Peluso. So let me bring Ralph on here. Hey, Ralph. Welcome back.
Hey, Susan. How are you?
I'm excellent. It's nice to have you 2 weeks in a row.
I know. This is great. I'm glad we could work that out. Going on a little vacation for a couple of weeks, so couldn't make the schedule work. So this will work out great. And we've got a tremendous guest tonight, Michael Gryboski, who's a prolific writer and has written some very interesting books. So
excellent. Well, let's bring Michael right on to join us. Michael, hello. Welcome to ZTV Live.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
That's good. Welcome.
Good.
We're glad to have you.
Absolutely. And Ralph, I'm going to let you take it away with Michael.
Fabulous. So, Michael, let's start out, as I do with every guest we have on, is I like the authors to tell our viewers a little bit about themselves, and so they can have some familiarity to you.
All right. Well, I was born and raised in Alexandria, Virginia. I spent the first nearly 29 years of my life growing up in that beautiful city. I lived next to George Mason Elementary School, went there back in the day. Yeah, I went to T.C. Williams High School, the old building specifically. By the time I graduated, they were already starting to demolish it and make it into the new building. But I used to go to Landmark Mall when it had stores. So I've seen a lot of Alexandria history, I guess, for someone my age. I have a master's in history. I focused a lot on historiography, historical memory, historical interpretation. And a lot of that in-depth study does oftentimes go into my fiction work to help me kind of frame setting and other aspects of the plot and the development. I recently moved down to Richmond because the rest of my family recently moved down to Richmond, so I wanted to be with them. But I will always have a special place in my heart for Alexandria. I occasionally go up there, get off of 95 and get onto King Street, and I feel like I'm back home again. So,
wow, fabulous. Now, were you at T.C. Williams when the coach was there, Herman
Boone? I think he had already retired by the time I showed up. But one of my older sisters actually had him for a driver's ed coach, interestingly enough. But she remarked, because she's like all of us, she's seen the movie, and she told me once, she said, I had Herman Boone as a driver's ed teacher. He was nothing like Denzel Washington.
No, he's not.
Yeah, they did a lot of embellishments on that character.
I had the fortune of playing with Herman Boone in an outing put on by the Knights of Columbus, and when we meet to go through the rules for the scramble and all that, and we're meeting all three of our foursome members, he says, "I'm here to win, and what's our game plan?" So once a coach, always a coach. So he was quite a character. So tell us about you work for the Christian Journalist or the Christian
Post.
Down in Richmond. What's that like?
Well, they're based in D.C., but they allow me to telecommute. About half the staff, I think, telecommutes, as a matter of fact. I guess it's the perfect time to put in the usual disclaimer that I am speaking for myself in this interview and not necessarily as a representative of my employer. Disclaimer out of the way. It's an interesting job. I like it a lot. I get to learn a lot about current events. A lot of, I guess, the mark of a good journalist, and when I think even better journalists than myself would say as well, is that you're learning along with everybody else as you research and look into events and what's happening. And so it's very interesting. I've learned a lot of random stuff, really, because I generally do general news, which means I get thrown into all sorts of stuff to report on. So it's as much a learning experience as it is a teaching experience, if that makes sense.
Yes. Now, were you involved with the article about the recent papal prerogative where he's going to allow the Catholics to have women perform some of the services, which has actually been going on in the Diocese of Northern Virginia for a long time. So
yeah, I reported on that. I know Vatican News was like my source for it because they, of course, were, if ever, a good source to use for a story like that, Vatican News. So I did do some reporting on that. Looked at the original English translated letter that Pope Francis sent. I found it was very interesting because I went to St. Rita Catholic School for 3 years for my middle school years, and one of the things I remember about St. Rita's, and it was that they actually, if I remember correctly, they wouldn't allow girls to be altar servers. It was boys only, and the reasoning was that the idea was, I think it was to encourage vocation. If you start them out as altar servers, they'll eventually consider becoming priests later on. So kind of like almost like a starting up there. And I remember that. I also remember this one time. I'm Protestant when it comes to the Christian branch, and they were specifically looking for Catholic boys to be altar servers. And I remember Sister Francis, who was the secretary. At one point, they apparently needed one more person to be an altar server, and she was all like, "Are you Catholic?" And I was like, "No, I'm Methodist." She was like, "Well, maybe someday you will be," she said with a smile, and walked off.
But they're always looking to baptize folks, the Protestants. I grew up in a Catholic in New York City, and I until I got to college, I didn't know that Protestants were actually Christian. That's how they separated
That's how I
their
see
mind
it.
back then.
Well, let me ask you then, just because I know that it wasn't really until Second Vatican in the 60s that the Catholic Church really started to emphasize that, yes, there are Christians outside of the Catholic Church. Were your upbringing, were you pre-Second Vatican or post-Second Vatican? Or
I was
at Second Vatican?
Yeah.
Yeah, that might have been.
The Second Vatican Council, I think, was 1968, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I remember it was 60s.
And they turned, that's when they turned the altar and did a whole bunch of other things. It was very, and went to English. I think it was in that time period. It may have been a little earlier, but I was pre-Second Vatican.
Not to give away my mother's age or anything, but my mother was in college during the Second Vatican. She had Catholic friends who were very worried about losing the Latin Mass because for them they found a lot of solace in how sacred it sounded.
There was a lot of pushback, but the other side of the coin is it was very easy to do the prayers. But the reason I asked about the papal announcement and girls, I was at Our Lady of Hope and St. Teresa, which are at the eastern edge of Loudoun County, and women were catechists, and they could give out the communion, so they'd go out into the neighborhoods and do it. And we had female altar servers. So it strikes me as, when I saw this, I thought it was a little late, or since some of it's being done here already. But anyway, that's that.
One of the things I've noticed with some of my research into Catholic history is oftentimes when they have these big decisions from the top, they actually were preceded by a lot of stuff on the ground. Like there was a lot of sentiment that already reflected these things. They were really just affirming that it was okay after all. Yeah, so I've seen that a lot with some of the teachings of the Catholic Church. They start at the ground. They actually do, for something that's technically an absolute monarchy, politically speaking, they actually do listen a lot to what's happening on the ground level, and it does eventually move upwards.
Yes, that's a good point. So let's talk about, how'd you get into, and you're a prolific writer, you've got several books out there. How did you get into writing novels?
Well, I mean, it really started back in 9th grade when I was attending Minnie Howard, and in a lot of ways it was driven by 9/11. Because 9/11, one of the things it did to me mentally is it really made me think about the world and what it looks like and how it should or shouldn't look. And one of the, I guess, upsides you could say is that after 9/11, there was a lot of kind of renewed positives in our society. There was a lot of, an increase in church attendance, a lot more patriotism. I mean, you could see a clear distinction with my class because, very few people would say the pledge September 10th. But when we came back on September 13th, because they gave us September 12th off in light of the tragedy, I mean, everybody stood up and said the pledge. And I saw a lot of these, positive developments overall, socially positive developments. And then I got to see them kind of gradually, kind of erode and ebb because time passes and people kind of return back to old habits. And what I had hoped I could do with my writing, which is why I started writing in my free time, is I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to try and bring those positives back, without a tragedy happening. And so I started to just write in my free time back then, and at first I would literally hand write on pen because I wasn't much of a typist. But as time progressed, I gradually went with the century I lived in and started typing myself and just kept working at it. I mean, the first thing I remember completing was a manuscript called Ravings of a Sane Man, which if I'm hoping will never ever be published because it was honestly garbage. It was the first try. I can say it now. Now, teenage me would have denied this, but 30-something-year-old me will admit that the first try was definitely not that good. I think that's how it is with a lot of folks who go into writing. It's usually the first manuscript, while you're proud of it, it's really not that, substance-wise, it's really not that great. It took time, effort, working on different manuscripts, different ideas. And so it was a years-long process to go from just, that handwriting to finally getting, contracts with small publishers and getting stuff released.
Right.
It's not an easy road.
No, it's not. It's not. And you're fortunate enough that you started early. I started work on my first book when I was almost 60, and it was published when I was 65. So it's a painful process, but when you get through it, it's satisfying. Now, one of the books that of yours that we reviewed was a few years back, probably 2 or 3 years ago now. It was called Children of Death Angel, and that had a very strong good versus evil tenet to it. Is that prevalent in most of your works, or just Death Angel?
I do try to, with all my works, I do try to look at issues of faith, politics, morality, sometimes emphasizing one more than the other two. I do try to look at kind of that nature of ideologically driven conflict. Maybe that's a byproduct of me being born and raised in the DC area that I would think of that as much as I do. But yeah, I do try to look into both the nature of morality, some of the nuances, some of the complications. I do try to look into the fact that even with, I do my best to have sympathetic villains as well, because I think ultimately, as you see with history, a lot of people who do bad things in history really thought they were doing good things. And they really thought that they were doing something that wasn't, at the least, that it was acceptable. Even if they didn't think it was good, they at the least thought it was acceptable. And that was kind of one of the things I wanted to look at with Memories of Lasting Shadows. Was my goal was to kind of look at, to kind of mess with the idea of something that a phrase I have come to deeply despise, which is the phrase "right side of history," and because people love to use that phrase, and it's just not it's really not a valid phrase, because we don't know how history is going to be written 50, 100, several hundred years from now. We don't know who's going to be considered the ultimate good guys, because honestly, if you look at historical writing, people will oftentimes bounce between right side and wrong side of history long after they've died. I think a great example of that would be Christopher Columbus. Whether or not Christopher Columbus was on the right side of history, that's heavily dependent on what time period of people you ask, who you ask, whether where they live, how they were raised, what country they're from. It's going to vary wildly.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's a very weird way to determine one's views.
yeah. Well, that's what history is. History is, written by the last man standing with a motive. So it can be rewritten. And you're a great straight man for our first trivia question. And for our viewers, Michael will be giving out two autographed versions, or two autographed copies rather, of his book,
Memories of Lasting
Lasting
Shadows.
Shadows. Thank you. And your title's long. And we
There's
get
a long story about how I got that title too.
we'll come back to that right after we give him the trivia question.
Sure.
So the first trivia question is, which two philosophers in the 17th and 18th century are used as the basic debatists for the nature of man, whether he's inherently good or evil? So who are the two philosophers that are connected with the debate, is man inherently good or evil? And as soon as we have a winner, we'll get a nod from Susan. So, Michael, tell us, how'd you come up with that title?
It's a pretty epic story, actually. It all started back in graduate school. I was doing a class called Historical Editing, which was all about learning how to create a volume of primary source documents. And maybe you've seen these occasional books in bookstores, like the letters of George Washington or the letters of Thomas Jefferson or correspondence, dispatches, stuff like that. And the class itself was actually technically out of state and off campus. It was at the Eleanor Roosevelt Papers Project in D.C., which I believe is in the George Washington University. It's technically on their turf. But thankfully, I was still able to pay in-state tuition to take the class, which was nice. Anyway, our final project was a group project where we were to take like 100 some odd primary source documents centered on Eleanor Roosevelt's listening tour of Japan. Because after she left the White House in the 1950s, she took a trip to Japan. Basically, did a lot of speaking engagements, engaged with a lot of students. It was a very big deal back in the day. And what my group had decided to do is we decided to focus on the debate over the dropping of the atom bomb, which came up a lot during her speaking engagements. And although it wasn't her husband who ordered it, it was Truman who ordered the dropping of the bomb on Japan, she still was very much asked about that decision and would oftentimes defend the decision too. And when we were compiling the primary source documents and we were creating the volume and stuff, we had to come up with a title for this. And I came up with the title Memories of Lasting Shadows, because in allusion to how when the atom bomb dropped, there were these weird situations where you could see shadows emblazoned on buildings and so forth. And so I thought that would be an appropriate title for it, and a nice catchy title. And we got an A on the project, so I guess my professor agreed that it was a catchy title. Flash forward to like about 5-6 years later, I've written this manuscript that became Memories of Lasting Shadows. And at the time, I actually had it titled 40 Years Later, because the idea was that it was set 40 years after a hypothetical Supreme Court decision. And my editor didn't like the title. And so he said, could you come up with a better title? And I just kind of peeled back in my mind. I thought, oh, how about Memories of Lasting Shadows? Because I thought to myself, it still kind of works. And my publisher agreed, and here we are now.
Well, it does work, definitely. And the one thing, and you mentioned that you played it forward 40 years. The one thing that I found remarkable is all of the technology advancements that you have throughout the book, from automated commuter cars to patches that hydrate a person. How'd you coming up with so many of those ideas?
Some of them are already out there, to be honest. Like, for example, one of the things I have in there were these like box-like robots that would deliver food instead of waiters. And
right.
Something like that actually already exists on the campus of George Mason University, where you can place a food order and they'll actually put the food in one of these little robots with wheels, and it'll actually wheel its way down campus. But other stuff, I just kind of thought to myself, what would I want in that situation? like as someone who does my share of interviews, and sometimes over the phone with long transcriptions, I would love it if there was just if I had a transcriber that just perfectly transcribed everything, so I didn't have to listen to it multiple times over and write it all out. And so I thought, surely they'll come up with something like that in 40 to 50 years, surely. And the patches thing, I just thought of some of the, because I do jog a lot in my free time. And oftentimes other runners, not me, but others will have, on their arms, they'll have their sports bottle with your drink, and they just, kind of take it from there. So what would be a more convenient thing to do? I think to myself, and if it was just like a patch, almost like a nicotine patch, except instead of giving it nicotine, it gives you your sports drink as you run, so you don't have to awkwardly deal with it. So that was kind of my secret, was to, with the unprecedented stuff, was to just think of what would make this situation more convenient, and ran with it from there.
Yeah, there are some great ideas, and for readers, when you read this book, some of the stuff that's in there forward-looking is just fascinating when you see it, how it's applied into the life situations. Susan, do we have a winner yet?
Not yet. We're getting close. We have one answer, and I just informed that it was half right. So keep guessing. Everybody still has a good opportunity. So.
All right, good. There's lots of themes in your book, and one of them that comes out in the end, when you talk about politics in any sense, is, does the end justify the means? And because you've got situations where there's some deplorable behavior, but in the end, the result is a good ending. So what is your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a struggle. It's a struggle just in general. A lot of these dilemmas, as you put it, as they could be thought of as well. I mean, I was always interested in, because we want to think that it's all done fully ethically without cheating or anything like that. And sometimes when you study history, you learn more about historical figures who were engaged in politics, who were engaged in activism. You find out that they weren't perfect and they didn't always follow the rules. And you say to yourself, well, that's kind of bad. But then you say, well, some of the stuff they did had a positive long-term thing. Like, Abraham Lincoln, infamously suspended habeas corpus, and he jailed a bunch of, Maryland legislators, and which isn't exactly the greatest, most ethical or constitutional thing to do. But in so doing, he prevented Maryland from seceding from the Union. And had it seceded from the Union, it would have been a very awkward situation. An already awkward situation for D.C. would have been made even worse, because then you would have had two states. And mind you, he didn't totally get away with it, because several thousand Marylanders actually did, on their own, go south and join Confederate forces. But it was still one of those things where, did the end justify the means? And it can be really tough when you're on the ground in that situation. And it becomes a lot easier to judge the stuff when you're living much, much later, like we are now.
Right. Yeah. So, because one of your characters it comes out at the end had a good objective, but the means, wasn't quite, I would say ethical.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things. That was one of the inspirations for kind of the tone of my book, was the movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not. Judgment at Nuremberg, from decades back, classic film. And I was inspired a lot by the tone of that movie when writing this, because with it there was the Judge Hayward, the American judge that was brought in to pass judgment on these Nazi-era judges. He learns a lot about Ernst Janning, who was one of the judges on trial. And as you go through it, you almost feel sorry for Janning, because you could tell the guy was a largely decent human being, but he was like everybody else. He was caught up in the fervor. He was caught up in the sentiment. You probably thought he was on the right side of history. It all kind of it corrupted him, and it corrupted his environment and his actions. And I felt that was kind of I was conveying something similar to that in the story. I would like to believe.
Yeah, it was. It's very intriguing when, and the way it plays out in your book. Again, it's fascinating and very well done. Susan, do we have a winner yet?
We do have a winner, and it's the one and only Michelle D'Amato. Congratulations, Michelle. Came up with, and it took a couple of guesses, but came up with Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So congratulations, Michelle. A signed copy of the book will be coming your way.
Great. So let's then bridge right into the second trivia question. And again, the rules of the audience: if we get a guess that from somebody who's already a winner, the signed copy will go to the second person in. So everybody has a shot. So the question is: here are some famous characters that are known for having redemption at the end of their parts, either in a book or in a movie. Severus Snape, Ebenezer Scrooge, and Clarice Starling. And now Clarice Starling is kind of the outlier, but she really does have some redemption qualities in there. So the question is, name the author that memorialized them. That's Severus Snape, Ebenezer Scrooge, and Clarice Starling. So, Michael.
Yes.
So, where do you stand on, are people inherently good or inherently evil?
Well, it's a tough question to answer, and as a Christian, I go to the Bible for this, and you do see, on the one hand, in Genesis it says we're created in the image of God. On the other hand, there's also Romans, which says that for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So it seems very much like we're a mixture. We've got both in there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's where John Locke came out. Was we're kind of in the middle, and we're a blank slate going in, and we get affected by a lot of different things along our journey. And good and evil can be independent, I guess. But in your book, at the end, you've got a person who is thought of as being very good, but at one time he was awful. So, how does redemption play out as you see it?
Well, I think there's a variance, because part of me wondered if that character in question was truly a redemption story per se. It was, in some respects, he was a redemption story because he quit doing the evil things he was doing. He quit being a monster. He did try to do some sincere stuff, but in a way, he also stayed consistent, because at every stage of his life, whatever he was doing, he thought it was the right thing to do. And that can be that can be tough sometimes. So, when it's determining whether or not someone has a redemption arc, because really redemption implies a lot of change, that someone's actually reversed how they think about things. And in a way, he was consistent in always kind of having a similar framework, even if he had a different item or aspect in that framework. It was still the same kind of framework going through it. In a way, it's kind of like one of the most interesting academics I've ever run across, not personally, but through literature, Eugene Genovese. He's very famous for his work, Roll, Jordan, Roll, which was a very influential historical work on the nature of slavery in America. And one of the things about Genovese is on the one hand, he went a full 180 politically. When he was younger, he was an avid, Marxist scholar, very much radical leaning. But by the time he gets to his later years, he's, conservative Catholic. He's speaking at CPAC. You can't really go that much from Marxist to CPAC. It's quite the range there. So it kind of seems, so in one respect, you can argue redemption with him. On the other hand, there was always a certain consistency in his personality and in his writing. There was always a bourgeois class that was the enemy. When he was more radical leaning, it was a more upper end capitalism and the like. But by the time he switched over his politics, that new bourgeois class was really more liberal professors, liberal elites. There was a consistency there, even though there was some ideological change, a lot of ideological change. There was still a very consistent framework there. And maybe for some people, that is how redemption works. You take the pre-existing framework, but you shift it. You spin it a little and you turn it a little so that it's facing a different direction. But it's like still the same mechanics, so to speak.
Yeah, well, yeah, in your book, and we'll talk about the characters here in a second, but this character is a senator, Senator Pettis, I guess. And, you know, the way the end came across to me is he was kind of reaching out to say, you know, I'm doing all this good now that's pretty much offset all the bad that I did in the past. And so that's why it felt to me like it was a redemption. And
I definitely can see that reasoning. I respect that reasoning.
Thanks. It's kind of like the worldwide wrestling entertainment, right? You take a bad character, you make him good, then make him bad again, right? So
they faces and heels and the turns, yes. Seen a lot of those over the years.
Yeah, we found out we both share an interest in worldwide wrestling entertainment, and if you've ever watched it, you can see how characters get manipulated from bad to good and good to bad, or vice versa. So, in taking a character like Senator Pettis, he goes from evil to himself feeling like he's doing some good. So,
and in a way, it's similar because oftentimes a lot of those face heel turns in pro wrestling are determined by audience reaction, how the crowds react to a person. I mean, there's been plenty of stories of you know, when good guy wrestlers were getting booed a lot, you know, the creative decision would be to turn them into villains. And conversely, when bad guys were seen as cool and stuff and people would cheer them, they would, you know, the creative minds behind these storylines would change them to good guys. And in a way, that's how Pettis was. I mean, he gauged a lot of what was happening in popular culture, and that determined a lot of what he stood for and stood against.
Right. Exactly. That's what my feeling was at the end. So tell the audience, our viewers, about Berta, as she's called.
Yes, yeah, but only by her good friends. They're the ones who called her Berta. Other people had to call her Berta Sheridan, or you know, respectful titles like that. But yeah, she's the journalist. She's looking into Pettis's past. She looks into these things. She'd gotten some story tips from a friend of hers named Michael Chan, who's a blogger, and they investigate these things. And with Roberta, she's a principled person. You know, she very much sees things, you know, objectively, morally. She has ethics, principles, and at times, you know, these things, they create frustrating situations for her, but she sticks to them. And when necessary, she has to really fight for them when situations get in the way. So she's a very ethical, principled person. And in that respect, it's kind of the opposite of Pettis, in that she stays consistent and doesn't just change with flow of time and pressure.
And she doesn't take no for an answer, does she?
Right. You got to be aggressive if you're going to be, especially if you're an investigative journalist, somebody who's paid to dig up things in particular. Admittedly, I don't do as much investigative journalism. I mostly do straight journalism, you know, based off of stuff that's already out there, you know, and maybe, you know, occasionally get interviews to kind of get more information. But yes, when you do, I mean, I've occasionally done some investigative journalism, not often. Nothing as big as Watergate, of course, but you have to be, you know, you have to really be aggressive, because if you're reporting on something that people don't want reported on, they're going to ignore you, and they're going to hope that you don't do anything. And
yeah, that's true. Tell the audience about Michael Chan, the people's journalist, I guess is how he is referred.
He's one of those people. He's one of those examples of what happens with, you know, what we oftentimes see in society today is people will take past eras, groups from past eras, and they'll lionize them, they'll idolize them in a way. I mean, and oftentimes in a way that's not technically how they were. I mean, I've heard a lot of, people will occasionally talk about being modern hippies and stuff, and people aspire to be like hippies, when in reality, they're probably, truth be told, they're probably more responsible than the average 60s era hippie was, because it went beyond just simply, wearing tie-dye and going barefoot or wearing Birkenstocks. There was a whole lot of crazy aspects to that lifestyle and stuff. But again, there's that kind of, they aspire to those past era feels, and that's how it is with Chan. He looked at, from his perspective, our era of the citizen journalists and non-professional journalist bloggers. He looks upon that group, that in his time period was a couple generations ago. He looks upon them in this very idealistic light, and then sees them as this great service to the country. And it's his friend, the professional journalist, Roberta, who points out, well, actually, they weren't perfect, and there were times when they would suffer pitfalls that a professional journalist would know to avoid. And that can happen to, again, that's a pretty common practice for people when they can idealize certain aspects of the past and certain groups from the past.
Yeah, these very interesting characters. Let's check in with Susan and see if we have a winner for the second trivia question.
Not yet. So viewers out there, I did type the question into the comments. So take a look and give us your best guess. So let's give them a little bit more time.
I thought that was the easier of the two.
It's tough. I mean, it's definitely tough. I think that the Clarice is a tough one to get.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody knows Severus Snape, I think, and of course Ebenezer Scrooge, but Clarice Starling is a little, as you said, a little bit tougher to get. But let's give them a little bit more time.
Clarice may have been the one I would have known off the top of my head.
Different people know different things.
Yes, it's true.
They are. So what are talk about some of the other characters in the book that are germane to the message?
Well, I liked one of the characters I came up with that I have a fondness for, rightly or wrongly, would be Johnny Bedford. He was the political strategist, and he's based heavily off of an individual I've actually interviewed and interacted with, whom I will deem nameless for the time. But there's a lot of that, because some people might be turned off by that type of political strategy and very much very aggressive political campaigning and trying to find just any little nugget of something to go after someone else. And it's, in some respects, it can be kind of a brutal way to live, but it can also be kind of almost fun, at least fun to watch, especially if you're not the target. And I remember years back there was a fairly controversial movie out there called I think it was Miss Sloane. I don't know how successful it was, but it gained a lot of headlines because there were a lot of people who said it was a bashing of the NRA or something, because the whole plot of the movie was about a DC lobbyist who's advocating for restricting like a gun regulation. And what I really thought it did more than anything, as someone who saw the film, was I thought more than vilify the NRA or anything like that, it really portrayed the life of a political strategist in a very dystopian life. I mean, in a dystopian lens, because her life was depressing. I mean, she was just, if you've ever seen the movie, I mean, she has no family. I mean, she has, very one-dimensional friendships, very fake feeling friendships. She seems to struggle to even convey basic emotions of empathy and sympathy, and she's like doing drugs and just sleeping around. Like it's a very, now mind you, Bedford never gets that bad. He has some limits of his own, but you kind of see kind of the darker side of that lobbyist strategist way of life, and Bedford has some of those manipulative aspects to his character and to what he's doing and how he does things. And in a way, he does have that ends justify the means mentality that you were talking about. And it sometimes just takes wheeling in from other people to stop him from going overboard on that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's very interesting, very savvy in what he does, and and intricate to the plot. What's the message you would leave with the viewers on the overall tenor of the book?
I would say beware of thinking that you're on the right side of history. Beware the thought that you should do something solely so that the next couple generations down the line will think you're a decent person. I mean, if you're going to stand for something, stand for it because you actually believe it. Stand for it because you've seen the evidence, you've weighed the evidence and the arguments, and you think this is the better way. Because the simple fact is, future generations are going to look at us cruelly no matter what. They're going to find something that they don't like about us and judge us by that. And sometimes the things that you think are going to be despised by a generation, and maybe even are despised by a future generation, might not be despised by the generation that shows up after that.
Right.
So I think that's a big important thing, is that, there was a great quote, and I'm just going to go ahead, if you don't mind, and read it,
Sure.
that I like a lot. It came from a Scottish historian named Colin Kidd. He once remarked, and I put the quote near the beginning of the book, he said, "If history shows anything, it is the failure of past generations to predict which aspects of their moral life future generations will find intolerable." And I think it's a very, very valid quote.
It is. It's a very avid, quote for the times that we're going through right now. So, hopefully, people will all get through this. We're all Americans. We're all on the same side of history as it relates to that, and we want to keep our republic strong. But for anyone out there, Michael's done some terrific writing. This book is politically charged. It's perfect for the time, and it's worth the investment of your time to read it. And he's got another work out there that's intriguing, which I wanted to talk about earlier, was Carla.
Yes.
Which she's talk about being on the wrong side of history. Right? How did you come up with that?
She had her reasons.
She had her reasons.
She was very much forced into it. If that's any comfort.
Yeah, a very interesting character, and it's another book that's along with the other two we've discussed tonight, to take a gander at. Let's check back with Susan and see if we have a winner.
We have a winner. Congratulations, Brian Marsh, who got the correct answers of J.K. Rowling, Charles Dickens, and Thomas Harris. So
Right.
Congratulations, Brian. Thank you so much for playing the game and for winning. If you could, please send the Zebra a private message on Facebook. Just send us a private message with your mailing address, and we'll be sure to get the signed copy of the book out to you. And thank you again for playing. So congratulations.
Thanks. And on February 9th is the next show, and we have children's authors, Diane Gonzalez and Courtney Kazmarczyk. And they've written two wonderful books, very thematic, very deep in their simple subtlety. And we're going to have a very interesting conversation with them on February the 9th. I look forward to it. So, Michael, thank you for joining us. You're a wonderful guest. Good luck with this book and your other books, and keep watching those Wrestling Raw on Mondays, and SmackDown, I guess, is still on.
Still real to me, darn it. Thank you again for having me.
You're welcome. It was
Terrific.
wonderful.
Terrific. Thank you, Ralph. Another wonderful show. Michael, thank you. Wonderful guest. And your book sounds a little bit almost too perfect for the times that we're living in right now. So congratulations. And we'll look forward to your next one. Ralph, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, yeah. 3?
February 9th. That's 2 weeks. Oh, 2 weeks.
Yeah. I think it's 2 weeks. I don't know. We'll see you on February 9th.
February
Okay,
9th.
well, that's going to do it for us tonight for ZTV Live. Thank you so much for watching. We love audiences that participate. Congratulations again to Michelle D'Amato and to Brian Marsh for winning the trivia game and winning free signed books. Please join us again tomorrow night for Legal Matters with Paul Dean. He'll be talking about small businesses and avoiding kind of legal pitfalls. So a lot of good information in there for small businesses. And of course, we're such a town of small businesses here that I urge everybody, if you know somebody who owns a small business, there's just a lot of really great information in there. So tune in tomorrow night at 7 o'clock for that. On Thursday, Virginia Amos is back with the Virginia Amos Show. And she has two members of Agenda Alexandria who will be on talking about some current issues of the day. So please join in for that. And remember, as much as you can, until then, to be the good news in someone's life.